This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. A handshake deal was reached last night between congressional leaders and the White House to fund the government through September 30th. As the deadline to avert a shutdown looms, that deadline is midnight Friday, and a deal only goes so far when you got to do the legislative work before the clock runs out. Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman of California is joining us now for more. Congressman, thank you so much for coming back to Bloomberg TV and radio. We know that the deal is in hand. We have not yet seen the text, and the House has this 72-hour rule to give you time to read the bill. Should that be waived in this scenario? Do you think it will?
The Freedom Caucus, which is the far right of the Republicans, are very sensitive about this 72-hour rule. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we're voting on Saturday rather than Friday. On the other hand, we all have districts. There's a 2-week district work period. We all have schedules on Saturday back in our districts. So it could go either way. The good news is that even if there is an interruption in appropriations of a few hours on Saturday morning, that shouldn't do too much damage to any federal program.
Is that what we're talking about here, Congressman? Maybe a couple of hours, the lights go out over the weekend and we come back Monday and this is all done? Or do you think a continuing resolution will be needed to patch our way through a couple of days here?
I think that we're either dealing with it before the deadline on Friday or we're dealing with it after the deadline on Saturday. I don't see a need for a continuing resolution. You certainly don't want to turn off the lights over the whole weekend, but I think a few hours on Saturday, it's unlikely that any light would actually be turned off.
Yeah.
Fair enough. And of course, after this weekend, as you say, there will be a work period for Congress. You'll be gone for 2 weeks. And then when you returned, there is other business that theoretically might be addressed or dealt with, including supplemental funding for allies like Ukraine. We were just speaking with Michael Allen, who worked under the Bush administration, about an idea that Lindsey Graham in the Senate has put forward of a no-interest waivable loan to Ukraine, that being the most likely path forward to get Ukraine the aid that it needs, given that obviously there is substantial Republican opposition to this. Is that something you would endorse, Congressman? If it gets Ukraine the money, would you sign on?
That wouldn't be my preferred way to do it. First, we have the Senate bill. It should be put on the floor. We'll pass it. Second, Ukraine is under tremendous economic pressure as well as tremendous military pressure. And putting this $60 billion on the right side of their balance sheet as a liability will make it very hard for them to borrow money for government operations and other things that they have to borrow money for during this crisis. We did an awful lot for Britain during World War II, but once we were fully allied with them, we didn't do Lend-Lease. We provided the military, the economic assistance. So it's not my favorite way to do it. If that's the only way to help Ukraine, then that's what we'll need to do. And frankly, the likelihood that we ever actually get paid back by Ukraine is so small. I think that it's more to our interest to make sure that Ukraine can borrow money in the bond markets.
It's pretty interesting, Congressman, the fact that you're not saying no to that, having Michael Allen in here, who Kayleigh mentioned, not saying no to that. We know Donald Trump is pushing for it, which leads me to think the Speaker of the House might be on the other end of the line. Do you have reason to believe that that could come to the floor soon?
It would delay everything, and I'm hoping that the Speaker will bring the Senate bill to the floor the way it is. It's not practical. It's not like you're actually saving the American taxpayer any money. But we'll have to see. We do need to start providing Ukraine with the military assistance it needs, as they've already lost many servicemen because they haven't had the ammunition.
Well, and of course, it's not just aid for Ukraine that is in question. Aid for Israel was also tied up in the package that the Senate sent over to the House that may or may not get a vote. But of course, the backdrop in terms of the U.S. relationship with Israel, at least at the Biden administration level, does seem to be getting more tense. Obviously, there was a conversation that took place between President Biden and Bibi Netanyahu yesterday in which there was a warning not to go into Rafah, that could be a mistake if there isn't a credible plan in place to protect civilians. I know Congress Congressman, that you've been very supportive of Israel as a U.S. ally, but does Israel deserve to continue to have that staunch support if it is ignoring the warnings of the Biden administration about civilian casualties in Gaza?
I don't think Israel is ignoring those warnings, and they certainly shouldn't. In fact, the #1 expert at West Point in urban warfare has said that Israel has done at least as good a job as the United States in avoiding civilian casualties in an urban warfare situation. We, of course, had Fallujah, Mosul, other experiences with urban warfare. And when you can have a 1-to-1 ratio of civilian to combatant casualties, that's about as good as you can possibly do in an urban warfare situation. Keep in mind, Hamas was in southern Israel and could have stayed there and fought. Instead, they decided to retreat behind their human shields and fight from behind Palestinian civilians. And once a force does that, it is very hard to minimize civilian casualties unless you just want to surrender to the terrorists. And I don't think anybody's suggesting that.
Congressman Sherman, I want to ask you about a suite of bills you're introducing tomorrow that you say will protect American investors from China. There are 4 bills, and one of them would prohibit U.S. index mutual funds from investing in Chinese stocks. Would this not further an economic Cold War with China? Is that your aim?
Well, I'm not trying to create an economic Cold War, but index investing requires, you don't look at any individual company. You just buy the whole index. And that might make sense for the S&P 500 here in the United States. It doesn't make sense for the unique risks that there are in the U.S.-China relationship. You have me on because I've been on the Financial Services Committee for 28 years. I've also been on the Foreign Affairs Committee for 28 years and chaired the Asia Subcommittee. And I think the markets are misallocating, kind of representing the risks that there be a rupture in the U.S.-China relationship. When you see the possibility that China might invade or blockade Taiwan, that needs to be priced into the markets, and there's no way for an index fund to really do that.
Well, in addition to that effort on mutual funds investing in Chinese stocks, among other things these bills would do include requiring publicly traded companies to tell shareholders how they're exposed to risks in China. Congressman, that feels like a disclosure kind of SEC matter. Have you talked to Gary Gensler about that idea? It would be up to him to enforce that, right?
It would be, and I have talked to Gary for over a year about this. I wish that it would be done through SEC regulation because that would get adopted more quickly. But we have a number of interests here. First, investors should know what the risk is. Second, companies should start reducing their risk. And finally, the greatest fear I have in Congress, or one of the great fears, is that China blockades or invades Taiwan, and then all the lobbyists from all the companies come in and blockade us and say, "Oh my God, you better not just let China seize Taiwan, because otherwise all our companies are going down because we all have this exposure." Now it's time for American corporations to act today and plan and de-risk. And if they don't do that, don't say that you weren't warned. It's now up to corporate America not to rupture the relationship, but to be prepared and to de-risk.
Congressman, thanks for coming back to see us on Bloomberg. Congressman Brad Sherman here on Bloomberg TV
if I can just
coming up on Balance of Power. Yeah?
The most important bill takes away the capital gains allowance for investment in Chinese stocks.
Understood.
Because we shouldn't be subsidizing.
Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
It's good to have you back. We thank you again.